Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name's Lisa. I'm here on the Bravely team, just here to kick us off today, and we're so excited to have you here for today's webinar, Creating Systemic Alignment Between Intentions and Impact. So as people are filling in, we're going to be using the chat feature a lot today, so I wanted to get started there, and I'd love it if you could all start by sharing your name and where you're dialing in from. So I can start. Again, my name's Lisa. I'm dialing in from Brooklyn, New York, in my home office, also known as my kitchen. And I'm really excited to hear from all of you today. So I see Jocelyn from Brooklyn, Boise, Bend, Oregon. Wow, okay, lots of people, Canada, another New Yorker, hi. So great, thanks for all participating. We are so excited today. And if you're still looking for the chat window, just hover over Zoom and it's in the right-hand corner. And it looks like a lot of people are doing this, but you can toggle to all panelists and all attendees. That way your message goes to everybody on today. And we're asking you to really participate in the chat today. We're gonna be coming back to this throughout the next hour to ask you questions and hear from you, your comments and questions, and the conversation just gets richer the more people participate. So we do really encourage you to get involved and take advantage of this opportunity to connect with your peers, ask questions of the panelists, and comment along with us. So we're gonna get started in just a few minutes. We'll be talking with human resource, diversity, equity, inclusion, and people leaders on creating that organizational-wide alignment. And so our next question that I'd love to hear from you all in the chat on is, why is it so important to align words and action in an organization? And if it's easier, kind of answer the flip side, when do you notice that that's not happening? When do you notice a lack of alignment? What is visible there for you? I'm hearing alignment builds trust again, develop credibility. Yep, when departments roll things out on top of each other, there's a lack of alignment there for sure. Great. Thank you all for chiming in here. Employees notice when words don't roll into actions. That's definitely something we'll be diving into later as well, for sure. So I'll let a few more people chime in here in the chat, which is great. Awesome. And then before we dive in deeper into the discussion, and before I pass it off to Hakemia, I'm going to quickly introduce the partners who've brought this group together today. And we're going to launch a poll as well, in case you'd like to connect with these partners more afterwards. So I'll read out to you here a little bit more about the organizations that have come together on this call today. So ThinkHuman unleashes the soul in business by equipping people leaders with the skills they need through leadership development programs founded on emotional intelligence and the science of behavior change. Bravely partners with organizations to provide on-demand professional coaching to employees at every level in the key moments that define the employee experience, empowering them to thrive in their roles and do their best work. And then Emplify partners with business executives and HR leaders to leverage validated anonymous employee feedback to create practical coaching strategies that help managers drive team performance and deliver on key business results. So we're going to leave this poll up for just a few more seconds and give you all a little bit of time to select there. You can feel free to select more than one if that feels right. Yeah, and we'll give you a few more seconds there. I'm seeing a couple people come in the chat too, which is great. Yep, we have wonderful. Seeing people sharing from Oakland. Awesome. Okay, so we've taken the poll down now, so I'm going to pass it over to Hakemia. Hakemia is a culture strategist and executive coach. Both worked with her before. She coaches employees at Bravely. Also has her own coaching practice, Divinely Powered. So Hakemia, I'm going to pass it over to you to get us started today.
Thank you, Lisa. Buenos dias. Good afternoon. Bonsoir to all of our attendees across the world. As Lisa stated, I am Hakemia Jackson, a vivacious executive coach, cultural strategist, and CEO of Divinely Powered. And today I will be your moderator. So there's a lot of performative allyship going around today. We're sounding the alarm, so get ready.
Just right in, Hakemia, just right in.
Yeah. I am sure you've noticed how organizations across the world are pledging to play a bigger part in combating systemic racism and inequality in the workplace, from executives kneeling to, MBA placing Black Lives Matters on their courts, to re-engineering recruiting practices and enhancing retention strategies. These are all great. And yes, it's a start. But when you take a moment and take a step back and take a deep dive and examine their track records, we find something that's disturbing, that not much has changed. In fact, what you find is that some corporations have actually benefited from structural racism and intentional inequality. Corporate America, business leaders, and you with us today, we have to go beyond the tweet or statement of intentions. The best leaders and organizations aligns their intentions with their impact. Our intentions is what we want to happen, but our impact is the experience that the receiver sees or gets. It's time to take meaningful action and reset expectations to a new and better normal. So today, all of us, we're going to be brave. We're going to be emboldened to use our individual and collective power to make a positive change. So our gifted and talented panelists today will shed light on the importance of creating alignment between intentions and impact. And we'll discuss what it truly looks like for an organization to do more than just talk about it, but be about it. So let's begin the exploration. First, I want to introduce our panelists. Lauryn Nwankpa, she's the head of social impact at Dave. Adam Weber, he is the chief people officer and co-founder of Emplify, one of our partners today. Lauryn Guilbeaux, she is the head of growth at ThinkHuman. And my friend, my man, my king, Dion, is the equity, inclusion, and belonging strategist at Bravely. You see how I did that, Dion?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Love that shout out.
Now it's time to take a deep dive with our panelists into, really thinking about your professional experience and how did the lack of alignment between intention and impact you, and how did that show up? So Lauryn, I would love to get some of your insight on that.
Yeah, absolutely, Hakemia. Thank you for that intro. For those, I guess to kind of level set, I'm in an underrepresented group. I'm a trans woman, and I have experienced this particular gap between intentions and alignment, and this sense of saying you are something and not actually taking the actions to become what you say you want to be as an organization. So I've had personal experience where I've been recruited by a company that outwardly claimed all kinds of things about inclusion. They were in the D&I space, that their values, spouted that we're going against the grain, and we're fixing this, and systemic issues are really at the top of our what we do for the market and what we do internally. Left an incredible job that I was at that I loved at a company that was truly aligned between their intentions and their impact. And then once I came into this organization, discovered that what they're saying wasn't actually true. There's documented years and years of systemic bias, lack of action from executives, and witnessed, especially as the kind of pandemic unfolded, a quick shift in priorities from anything related to their values to just the bottom line dollar. And I think we see that a lot with venture-backed companies. I think it's a tricky place to play when the executives are their metrics are tied into just dollars and not tied into values alignment and D&I. And so when I really think about like the harm that was caused with that, not only to myself, but all of the other underrepresented groups that saw this particular company as a place that could be safe for them to be themselves, that they would get a real shot and that the systems would support them and be built for them. I just saw so many people just disenfranchised, lose trust in the organization, and have to navigate away after doing the big lifting of leaving a job and coming into a company and having to shift outside. And like, when I looked at that and like actually felt it happen, I was like, this is worse than if the company said nothing about D&I, had no values that talked about equity or inclusion, because I would have at least known, right? Everybody who went in would have known, but people came in with an expectation. And then when you fail that expectation to individuals, especially underrepresented groups, it rips the floor out from under you. There's so few safe places that if you claim to be a safe place and you're not, I feel it's actually more toxic than being true to where you're at in your journey.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh, that's a really deep story. And just the vision of when you said it rips the bottom of the floor, I've seen resources literally fall down because of the misleading messages that organizations have put out there and not truly being true to their word. And in previous conversations, you mentioned even greater, the impact, it may impact you horribly, but think about the people that's to come. You talked about a lot about that. Elaborate a little bit more on it for me.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an organization that like says you care about getting rid of systemic bias and racism and you're creating a safe place, like it's not only one individual, but you've got so many people coming into the company, they're going to realize it, they're going to leave, and then they're going to talk on Glassdoor, they're going to talk to their networks, and you're going to be found out these days. There's too much connectivity and there's too much social interaction online, and we're getting more comfortable as employees in speaking up and not putting up with it anymore and saying, this is wrong, I'm no longer going to put up with this. And you're going to see more and more of that within organizations, of individual contributors raising their hands and being vocal and saying, this isn't working.
Oh, come on, Lauryn, you're bringing it out, girl.
And something I've been thinking about, like I thought a lot about after I made that move, that turned out to not, it didn't work out. I've been thinking, this ties into the work that Adam's doing. I'm a huge proponent. I spent some time in the employee engagement space, and I believe culture surveys and collecting continuous feedback and measuring how you're doing towards your values is incredibly important for organizations to do. And I'm telling people who are applying for new jobs now, before you join, ask for the latest survey results. Ask them to tell you their plans on fixing any of those issues before you join an organization, and hold them accountable to those plans as an individual that joins the company. I think companies should open that up to people who are coming in and just be honest about where you're at. This is a journey, but you got to be honest about where you're at today.
Yes, you are so right. And I love that passion. I see it coming through. And Adam, you talk a lot about this journey, how some of us at times we forget how much, when you're intentional, there's a level of commitment that's needed, and we forget about that. But you bring up some really great points in previous conversations where we have to look at both short-term and long-term, that journey, not just the quick fix and the quick wins.
Yeah, I think right away for us, when as this became a cultural topic that was top of mind for people, our immediate reaction was like, we want to be authentic in our response, but we also want to think about long-term change too. We don't want to just put out a glossy press release, check the box, and go, hey, we did it. But also we're a technology company in the heartland of Indiana, like right in the middle of Indiana. And we go, well, we're not where we want to be. And our immediate, it's like, it's really tempting, I think, to pull away from the conversation. And we've just made a commitment. We're going to lean into the conversation. We're going to be a part of the conversation. We're choosing that. The phrase I'm using is progress over perfect. We're going to keep moving forward.
That. Come on, Adam, you better preach.
when you talk about the long term, the one that really jumps out to me is it's opportunity creation. So, there's all sorts of things on the front end you can do with hiring. We'll talk about some of these, like hiring and bias training and all of these things, but how are we developing leaders inside the organization so that when opportunities arise, we are actually creating a more equitable environment that will create long-term change, that will be part of the legacy that we're all building?
Yes. Oh, I love that. And Dion, I would love to hear just based on, your experience as well, when you've seen just that misalignment with intentions and impact, and the lack of trying to do what Adam said, really engage the employee and see, where are we really? Are we truly authentic and speaking from a place where we want to see change happen?
Yeah, so, and I also want to go to Lauryn's point. You mentioned this is something that you see in venture-backed companies, but this is also prevalent in public spaces, in nonprofit spaces, in philanthropy spaces, in which there is the stated goal, the glossy press release, like Adam mentioned. And when you start to peel back, what are the goals associated with it? What are the budgets associated with it? Who are the people associated with it, and the amount of staffing you put towards making these things happen? That's where the rub and the disconnect comes. So, Adam, as you mentioned, the heightened sense of awareness around systemic oppression, which has been going on for a very long time within our country, since the design of our country. I was in government, and one of the big challenges that we saw throughout the pandemic is, are we going to be able to make decisions that both are able to support the safety of our residents and of our communities, while also trying to balance that against moneyed interest in terms of trying to restart the city and make sure that we're able to get businesses rolling. And we constantly saw that challenge in terms of, are we going to open up the schools? Are we going to allow people to be out? And even when we start talking about things like the defund the police and police abolition movement, you saw a lot of those same questions in terms of, are you going to continue to move towards the space of the status quo, or are you going to make decisions that are aligned more directly to supporting and alleviating the challenges that we see within our communities? And as you saw at least within New York City, that was a very big question that came up in terms of our city council, in which there was a lot of just energy and campaigning and movement around being able to move some of the money from our policing allocations into supporting the community. And we saw that didn't happen, right? And in the middle of a pandemic, we're thinking about how are we supporting our communities. And when the moment came, we were able to have the opportunity to be able to take the money and move it into communities. We weren't able to do that as a city. And I just wonder what that means, especially as our administration, our mayoral administration, ran on the tale of two cities and being able to create a greater sense of equality within our city. So just being able to see, like, this is what we campaigned on versus this is what we did in that moment of difficult decisions. And these are hard decisions. I won't say that they're easy to make. At the same time, though, if you set that as the intention and if you set that as a value, it's really important for us to be able to make decisions aligned with that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dion, for sharing. And Lauryn, Guilbeaux, you talk about how tough these decisions are, but I love this quote that you gave me, and I want you to say it first. You know, you said, "Hey, we created these systems, but what? But we can burn them down."
Yeah, they can all be erased. They were built once from scratch. So why can't we knock them down, create something fresh and new? I think it's like it's a natural cycle. And I think like we're actually doing that at ThinkHuman right now. We have a culture committee and we're looking at all of our systems right now, making sure they align to our values, they align to our integrity, and are spending an incredible amount of like time when and companies I think underrate how much time it actually takes to be intentional. It's very easy to just run around and throw stuff around, but
Right.
intentional and actually build like with everybody in mind, that takes effort.
Yeah, totally, it does. And so, Lauryn, when you think about the effort that's needed, you talked, you know, to me previously about really creating a new norm. So what does that new norm, you know, look like to you and what you do at Dave? Is she frozen?
Lauryn with why?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think she's frozen, but anyone, please feel free to answer that. What do you think that new norm looks like?
Oh, Lauryn's back.
Can you hear me, Lauryn?
Yes, I'm back now. I am so sorry, y'all. I am having the worst day. I totally jinxed myself, so I do apologize.
You're fine. It was right when I asked you a question too. It's okay, but hey, let's keep with the flow and the energy of it all.
Yes.
Yeah, we're agile, right? So,
yes.
so you talked a lot about just this new norm, right? And not moving or trying to stay with the status quo, but looking at creating a new norm within organizations. Elaborate a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and just to really just make a couple of notes on the last question, and I do apologize, y'all. I had to hop off because my power is going out, but everything's great. But so I apologize if I'm being a little bit repetitive to some of what the other speakers said, but it really, you know, if anything that 2020 has taught us is that, you know, this is an unprecedented moment that we find ourselves in, and we cannot move backwards from here. Like, we just know too much. We've seen too much. You know, we've peeked behind the curtains, and it's a mess. You know, it's my favorite word of 2020 is raggedy. And what we're seeing a lot in our systems, in our institutions, and in the status quo and the way of doing things just isn't enough. And just really quickly to kind of go back onto one of the earlier points was, I find that people spend a lot of time perfecting their performativity, and they don't spend a lot of time doing the real work to understand how to, you know, dissect how they're complicit in these larger systemic issues, dissect how they are reinforcing the status quo, and really truly investigating kind of their role in doing right by, you know, the world around them and helping to kind of contribute to the change that they want to see. And you know, and I think, you know, when we think about systems change, when we think about institutions, I'm realizing more and more just how deeply personal this work really is. You know, you really can't talk about systems change, institutional changes, and I know Lauryn has mentioned this too. It's like, you know, these are all intentionally built processes, procedures, systems that are designed to actually have the exact, outcome that we're seeing, to be perfectly honest. And so we have to, I really kind of lean on a lot of the kind of critical race theory and Black political thought of like, incredible Black women who really encourage us to have an imagination as to what does life beyond this look like, and what do we need to equip ourselves with, what tools do we need to have, what introspection do we need to have to actually make that a reality. So just wanted to start there. And then what else, what was the other piece of the question? I'm sorry.
No, you answered that beautifully, and I would love for us to kind of segue in, because based off of what you said, into, how do you really hold up the mirror to these senior executives or these organizations who fail to embody the values that the company espouses? Like how do you get them aware and on board?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I quite frankly struggle with, because of my social location as a Black woman in America, but one that does realize a lot of privileges that I do have in terms of like educational status, in terms of where I live, in terms of just all sorts of things that I've been afforded. But I still sit at an intersection of oppressions, and in a lot of the systems and spaces that I find myself in were absolutely not designed with me in mind. And so one thing that I struggle with is just this idea of what is my role and responsibility to help educate, to lift the blinders off of somebody who has exponentially more privilege and access and power and money than I do. And what is the role that I have to play in taking responsibility to help kind of, like I said, kind of shift and change those systems and help and shift those mindsets. So what I've kind of landed on really is, I was joking with some folks on another panel I did yesterday about, and I'll keep it PG-13, I promise, but how somehow in the last couple of years, I have the last F, F-U-C-K, that I had left in my body just flew away. And it was an amazing moment because I was like, I don't care. I don't care about asking tough questions. If I have to feel uncomfortable because this system or this space isn't meant for me, then we all got to feel uncomfortable until we make it so that no one feels uncomfortable. You know what I mean? And so I have to show up in that way. I have to show up kind of unapologetically, authentically, and just really call it out when I see it. And then, and I totally recognize that that is not everyone's experience at all. But I do think that there's something to be said about the idea of just getting to that place where you don't have any more fear left. When you are not afraid to call out your CEO, you're not afraid to kind of like, to feel like just because you might not be in leadership or you might not be a decision maker about a specific kind of area of work, that you can't call it out. And doing so actually really has, in my experience, asking those tough questions and having those candid conversations and escalating issues up to the highest kind of chains of leadership has, in my experience, really created spaces for other people to actually do the same. And so you look around and you're no longer the only one asking these questions, shaking the table, ruffling those feathers. People feel empowered to also do that as well. So it's a struggle to kind of find out, what's my responsibility to, teach people who have way more privilege and power than I am to do and be better. But I also just don't lose a wink of sleep after, making people uncomfortable by asking the real questions. So
yes.
Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Oh, yes, ma'am. You did. Look, I'm reading the comments. People are like, preach. I'm shaking my head. Go ahead,
Can
Dion.
I connect to that really quickly? So I just also want to be mindful of, like, you have to understand the trade-offs for that, right? So like Lauryn coming in fearless, I'm always the person asking questions similarly. Love that, love being in that space. At the same time though, if you have been someone who has been able to navigate these systems, you have been successful and being connected to the status quo and, working twice as hard and, honestly being used to working within the norms of whiteness, right? If you move to this space, there is a trade-off, right? And you have to be mindful of that. You may not be allowed in certain spaces anymore.
Yep.
The senior leadership team might not look to you for certain things in the same way that they used to, because they know you're going to be that person who is shaking the table.
Yeah.
Right. So as long as you are okay with that, and that a lot of that again comes with intention and impact and the sense of alignment, making that decision to be able to ask the hard questions has to come with that same thing that Lauryn mentioned in terms of not losing a wink of sleep, right? Because you know that you are here making these decisions, asking these hard questions for a reason. And moving towards that and taking the space to be able to do that. If that is your purpose, do that, stand in it firmly, but recognize that when you start to challenge the system, the system doesn't just sit there, right? There are things that and levers that are put into place in order to affect people and like move people out of the space you do that. So just want to be mindful of that in the space.
100%.
Right.
100%.
That's a good point. And I oftentimes say, Dion, which, some of you attending may have heard me say, I'm married to the outcome. And so that means there will be sacrifices that's going to have to be made. And I'm okay with that because I'm a ride with it. Again, I'm doing more than talking about it. I'm being about it. And so in this journey that we're taking, it's you talk it, you walk it, and you stand firm with that shield of protection, from your elders, from your ancestors to protect us on this journey. But Adam and I had a really good conversation on what does it look like, being on the other side, being in that place, assuming, you're a white man, privileged, and feeling uncomfortable in those times where, I realize I have to allocate more of my budget to look for people of color. And, sometimes I may not be married to that approach. So Adam, please, could you, elaborate on our conversation a little bit more about that, just from your vantage point?
Sure. And, for me, I think this has been a part of my life, my entire growing up, in a very different view. I grew up in a rural, all white community, had a Black foster brother who was the only Black student in our entire school. And I saw firsthand that we weren't having the same experience. And then just was fortunate enough to have parents who sent us to environments where we were the minorities. So we had to, where we had that experience. And I think what that laid a foundation, though, is a sense of responsibility too, to take a real honest look, though, at, so if that is what do you do then in this environment? And I think one thing with leaders, I'm just thinking about this question you were asking too, and why I feel optimistic. If I could share one view of optimism on what's going to solve this, is that, or one of the things that's going to help is that right now there is, I think, a general sense that there are leaders who maybe are saying things that they're not living out. But here's that the fundamental values of our workforce have shifted. And what used to be comp and stability, just give me a job and I'm employees don't feel that way anymore. There are glass houses. You can literally write reviews, apply for jobs. There's that. But also the fundamental values of our workforce have shifted too. And employees are saying the things they value the very most in the workforce right now: a company that has a purpose that matters, leadership that is authentic, and growth opportunities for themselves. And so that leadership that is authentic, the BS filter is very, you're not fooling people anymore, and so you can't just get away with just saying things and the workforce is actually demanding change in that sense.
Yep. You are so right. And, and I oftentimes hear that it has to come from the top, but now I'm starting to believe that your staff, the people in the middle, are feeling emboldened in it and recognize the value in the collective power to really keep their leaders accountable. So when we think about, what we need to keep our leaders accountable, Dion, what are some of those, things that we could do, just from your background as a D&I strategist and executive coach? What are some of those things you recommend?
Yeah, I would give two things. The first would be, well, actually three. So the first would be understanding your why and why you're doing this work. So if you, as a leader, are in this specific position and your organization has said diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, justice, all of the acronyms are important to you as an organization, really understand why that is and what position you plan to. So if you are recognizing that it's important to the organization, as a leader, those are things that you also have to carry. And with that, again, understanding the trade-offs. So if you are in a very specific position of leadership and have privilege and recognize that, you have to be a part of this change, think about like what is it that's going to continue to drive you to be able to do that. So that's the first. The second is to recognize that this is not a favor to marginalized communities. This is not a nice to have. This is not because it makes your business look good. This is alleviating and rectifying hundreds of years of oppression. People are not underrepresented by accident. Communities are not underrepresented by accident. They were historically excluded from your spaces. Your leadership team did not just become all white. The places, or rather the processes that you have in place, the practices that you have in place, the expectations that you have for advancement within your organization are all connected to what folks deem to be or what folks see to be, quite frankly, whiteness. So when you see people navigate into that space, even folks of color who are able to go up the ladder, they are still navigating from a space and position of whiteness, in which, as a person of color, they have to be much more comfortable in navigating in that space. So recognize that this is not a favor, but you're doing this specifically for being able to make up for what we've seen historically. And then the third is really being understood, or really understanding what it means to examine processes. So you may say, I don't have enough diversity within our leadership team, right? Or I don't have enough diversity within middle management. Well, then let's look at what are the different levers for promotion within the organization. Okay, well, in order to get promoted, they have to score this on a performance review, and they need to have cross-functional visibility within the organization, and they need to just work hard. Okay, well, how are you defining working hard? Okay, how do people get access to cross-visible projects? How do people score high on their performance reviews? And really be able to understand what it means to move from here is the most objective criteria that we've set to the places where you have discretion or subjective criteria. So for example, if I say, in order to be promoted, you have to be visible within the organization. Well, how do you become visible? Well, it's based on the projects you get assigned. Well, how do projects get assigned? Well, managers assign them. Okay, well, how do managers assign them? Well, it's normally based on the person who they like the most, or who is most like them, or who they can trust, or who they can connect with. Well, how do they decide that? And then you start thinking about, okay, well, now let's look at that. How do we make that more objective? How do we make that more, not even just objective, but standardized, right? So that you're being able to recognize what those disconnects are in terms of your process. So that's a lot there, but those three things, I would say,
it's a lot there, but it shows like how deep we gotta go to burn it down. To Lauryn's point, right? It's not just a statement. It's not just one strategy. Adam talked about, we also have to look at what policies we create that may potentially impact the D&I strategy. Talk about that a little bit more, Adam, regarding those two.
Yeah, well, for us, as part of that honest look, you know, and you talk about intentions and impact, one of our 6 core values is that we're a caring community. And part of being a caring community for us is that we're inclusive, we're equitable, it's a safe place for all, and there's opportunities for all. And then when we look around at the company, one of the things we started to evaluate is, well, we're not as diverse as we want to be. And why is that? And we started looking at our hiring, the way that we hire. And as a small company, a lot of the ways we get employees is through our referral program. We started looking at that referral program. We go, now wait a second, like this isn't reflective of the type of that value that we're trying to build and create. And so we've realized with that we have to apply a lot more intention, and it's not going to solve itself. I just super candidly, it's not going to solve itself on its own. When we post a sales job, for example, at our company, 9 of the people that apply through the website look just like me. And so without building proactive intention, and so that goes down to like how the job postings read, where you post the jobs, how you proactively source candidates, like really rethinking the referral program. That was for us. I mean, this is like the foundational layer. And then with that too is like putting real metrics behind the work that you're doing and exposing them. Because I feel like you can't just say, hey, this is our intention. It's, hey, here's what we're actually trying to do. And we're going to share the progress that we're making on this. Like, are we actually moving the needle and making a difference in a long-term way? Again, not just like doing a press release.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love that, sharing the progress. And Lauryn Nwankpa, you talk about, looking at the impact in the processes and the products and the technology, and keeping that tied to everything within the organization. Elaborate a little bit more for me on that.
Yeah. I mean, so my work is all around operationalizing impact at kind of early-ish stage startups. And so what that means is like we're moving away from kind of traditional conceptions of like feel-good corporate social responsibility that can be very siloed. They can be very much an afterthought. They don't critique the ways in which these businesses might be getting their money or getting their profits by these like ill-gotten means, but they can hide behind a check written to a children's hospital because that's them doing good. And so I'm constantly challenging organizations internally and through kind of advising and consulting to think about how they can solve real like social problems through the kind of core functions of their business and their product and their services. And so, for example, I work at a challenger bank in the fintech space right now. And we are looking to not only disrupt a system that is inherently biased and discriminatory and straight up racist, and it has perpetuated lack of access, barred people from accessing credit, there's all kinds of problems with the banking industry. But beyond that, we're seeing, especially now as it's highlighted through, this pandemic and the kind of economic kind of reverberations that it has caused, is that people are literally on the edge of financial precarity at all times in a lot of ways. And so how are we solving for that? There's one thing to be able to solve for access and lower cost, much more transparent banking services, but then how are you actually looking to push the needle on getting somebody from a place of financial precarity because of these systemic generational systems that were built to and are doing this by design, and getting them to a place of financial health by acknowledging these externalities that aren't going away, anytime soon. Yeah. And I think it really, having that approach kind of just like, almost like begs this question of like, how do we center communities? How do we center our customers? And if you're being explicit about the fact that you're helping people that have traditionally been marginalized, traditionally been barred access, traditionally been left behind, then you're constantly thinking about like, how do I build this business better? And you should be deeply uncomfortable when you look around and you see a homogeneous team. You look around and you see that some of your business practices are weird or raggedy or exploitative or exclusionary. And so like, I think that's where I kind of get caught up a lot, is like the intentions are really good. And like, I think but they can kind of also fall in the line of like the performativity. And I constantly go back to this idea of, you need to be just as uncomfortable as the most marginalized and oppressed person on the planet. You know what I mean? Like you as a person of privilege, power, access, etc. Like, you have to be just as uncomfortable, because otherwise, it's just all talk. It's just
Yes.
talk, and so we can be digging as deep as we want to dig in the processes and the policies. But if the white man doesn't want to get out of the way to create space for people who are more marginalized, then where do we go from there? And so we have to really be kind of challenging ourselves to think about, this is, again, this is the hill I will die on, but that this is deeply, deeply personal work. And people have to be really willing to think about, what are you willing to put on the line? What privilege are you willing to give up? How are you willing to get out of the way to create a space where people of color, for trans women to be leaders, for people to get more access to capital so they can build, businesses and things like that. Because sometimes, and I know Fatma and other people on the ThinkHuman team have heard me say this before, but like, sometimes people just need to get out of the way, because I'm not going to keep arguing back and forth with you about, my humanity or the right for someone like me to be in this space and be in a leadership position. If you can't get on with that, you got to get out of the way. You just got to get out of the way. So
preach. So, and look, we're on the same page here, Lauryn. Girl, I've said it on multiple webinars. I'm okay if you don't care. And I'm reading some comments and some people are like, oh my God, I feel uncomfortable, but in a good way, which is awesome. But if you're the person that feels uncomfortable and it's like, what the hell is she talking about? I'm okay if you don't want to join this movement. Just move the hell out of the way and allow us to make progress. So, you bring up some really good points. I feel like this is definitely our heart work. And what I mean by that is connect yourself to your heart. At the deepest, if you've seen a child that was left out on a playground, hopefully you would say, hey, come and join us. So now I'm just an adult. What makes it any different?
Exactly.
My age shouldn't change it, nor should my color. And so that's what it means. Just we can make certain things so complex, but get simple about it. Get down to just the bottom line of just humanity and empathy and the things that's really needed for us to shift culture. And so, Lauryn Guilbeaux, I want to bring you into this conversation because we talked about it. Let's assume that leaders, now they're aware of the issue and they're pledging, to commit themselves to the initiatives, but then they may mess up. What advice would you give them?
I think one is we have to think about, like, if you're a leader and you're messing up and you're not quite sure why, like, you need to do that work to dig in and understand why. You need to get development to increase your emotional intelligence. You need to start understanding how to truly be empathetic, and you need to start doing the work on yourself to understand your privilege, unpack all of your past traumas and how you're bringing those to the table in an organization. I think the human impact that we have in our work is not only on the client side, but just in every interaction that we have with each other in the workplace. Like, we have to really think of how that impacts someone else. And if a leader can't get there, they have to look for development opportunities to increase that awareness and be able to communicate that and show that ability as a leader to the organization and embody like empathic leadership in that way. So I think it's for me, it's all about like those leaders who have the privilege, who the system has worked for them, and who have the resources to get help. Like, they need to be doing that.
Yeah, getting help. And when we think about getting help, Dion, what are some ways that Bravely provides that help to those leaders and organizations?
Yeah, so a lot of it is similar to the work that I described in terms of really trying to understand what's at play for you, what is the gap that you're facing, and being able to dig into some of these processes. And I know one of the questions that was asked was around examples that we've been able to help those empower us get out of the way. So I would love to hear what other people think about it. But at least for me, what I also recognize is that within an organization, there's like the traditional hierarchy and power structure. But then one of the ways to kind of navigate outside of that is figuring out what are the different informal levers and opportunities for power. So traditionally, when you want to get things done, you have to go to your boss to their boss to their boss up the line. But then being able to figure out, okay, who are your champions within the organization? How do you organize around bringing folks together for specific points of advocacy? And then based on that collective power within your organization, being able to try to make things happen through that lens. So an example of this in a past role, one of the big things that I wanted to be able to do is get our leadership team to take a training around conversations about race. And there was a lot of backlash from that. People did not want to have it, or they said they were into it, but then when it came down to like actually setting the time aside to do it, there was a lot of backlash. And I felt like I had already put all of my energy in. I've been arguing, I've been, giving up all of my emotional energy. And for that, there was an opportunity for me to then leverage allyship. So who was a mentor or leader that I can lean on in that moment, who didn't have the same identity as me. So this was a white woman who could then step in to say, this is exactly why we need to do this, and like push them from their specific position and like leverage the political capital that I had to be able to engage that person to stand in as an ally, because I knew how I was doing it and what position that I was taking was not going to work. But being able to leverage and organize other people to then activate them to say, hey, can you step in to take this on, was able to then get people in the room because they were able to understand that, someone of a similar identity to me is also saying we need to do this. Therefore, we're getting into it and we should do it. And it's hard. Again, none of this is easy work, right? None of this is going to be like perfect work to do, but it is the work that we need to do because we're trying to align those intentions and the impact that we have.
Thank you so much, Dion, for sharing. And does anyone else have anything to add to that point?
I do think you raise a really important point, Dion, and something that comes up for me a lot when I'm having conversations about people making a transition from either the nonprofit sector or the advocacy and activism space into the private sector in corporate America or tech. And they wonder what skills are transferable, right? From this work, grassroots organizing, activism, passing legislation, et cetera, to, program management and getting buy-in across a team at a tech company or something like that. And one of the things I always tell them is that that organizing skill set of being able to build coalitions with people, getting people involved, building up that capacity of humans to be able to kind of put that pressure on leadership and on decision makers is so incredibly important. And it's something that is deeply uncomfortable for the private sector because they're used to people just kind of falling in line and being a cog in the machine and not having that kind of collective power or voice. That's why people are so uncomfortable with things like unions and things like that. But I think that the second part of that is I have a good friend of mine. Her name is Ida Davis, and she runs this organization called Decolonize Design, which I love. And her work is all about, her work is all about kind of introducing these Black, Indigenous efforts to kind of understand how to kind of bring about accountability, to critique these systems, dismantle these systems, and have, again, that imagination to kind of bring out, a better solution. And it's all about centering voices that have never been centered before. It's all about, because I think, taking a step back, I think this work around impact and DE&I tends to be, we kind of get lost in this conversation around like, well, we need to have person X or identity Y at the table. But we need need to, to your point, Lauryn, we need to critique the table. We need to burn the table down. We need to be thinking about why are these systems such, that we are even having these conversations right now. And so part of that work is bringing in these kind of activist organizing traditions, kind of critical race theory traditions on critiquing these systems, doing that real work. I know I'm going to keep reiterating this. I sound like a broken record, but it is so important. And I think that there's so much more power that people have than they even recognize, and how to kind of bring those traditions into the private sector, into the corporate sector, to magnify the collective voices that they have, to kind of apply that pressure, to hold leadership accountable, and to think about, what are the real changes we need to be making, so we can have those conversations and ask those questions like you posed, Dion, that kind of get us down to the most granular level of why, we're seeing what the status quo really is. So I think that's a really important point, is that we do bring a level of a skill set that's very important to this work, to the table, that sometimes we forget about.
Thank you so much, Lauryn, for sharing that. And I think about, in addition to, Dee and I, when we align our intentions and impact to just simply build trust in an organization, I think that's important as well. So Adam, I think about what you do in your organization, and just having those employee engagement, whether it's surveys or focus groups or whatever that looks like. How does your organization bring all of that out?
Yeah, well, I think the reason I'm so passionate about data is because a lot of this gap of how you actually create impact is, we do need to change the hearts and minds of leaders. And I truly have just seen it's any number of topics, but data is one of the most powerful ways to change the hearts and minds, when they come face to face with reality. When they're living in a bubble, and you can expose that bubble. And this could be on any topic. This could be on the psychologically toxic environment that they're creating, and they come face to face, seeing how it impacts their organization. And so the same with DEI, and we have an assessment that we run that just helps the leadership come face to face. 1 in 5 people who've taken our assessment, hundreds of companies, 1 in 5 say they've personally experienced prejudice at their office. But how many leaders know that themselves? But when you come face to face with it, well, now right? So now you are truly you are now with intention deciding to avoid that hard conversation. And so I really do think it's a really powerful way to start to change, and it opens dialogue, it changes hearts, it changes minds, which is why I think it matters.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam, for sharing. I see people providing some, hey, Adam,
it's free, by the way, just for everybody. Right. So just if anybody, it's on our website, and it's a diversity assessment. So you can, if you're trying to convince just a baby step, that's a really easy way to do it.
Yeah. So we're reaching. Oh, go ahead, Lauryn.
Can I hop in and add to that, and kind of there's a question that was asked that I think is really important, and Sonia Petit-Perez, if I mispronounced that name, I'm so sorry. We've been talking a lot about DEI and companies' alignment to that, but also thinking about the rest of the values that a company has and embodies. How do we hold a company to its integrity, to its values? And I just wanted to add to that and say kind of how we at ThinkHuman think about that and help organizations do that, is by really taking a look at those values, helping them identify the behaviors, the types of behaviors that align to those values, build those behaviors into your performance cycles, and train on those behaviors. So everything and value. So every bit of training and development that you're doing within your company starts to build, as long as you're aligning with your values, starts to build a shared vocabulary and framework to work within, and creates really powerful alignment across not only leadership, but also individual contributors. Because if you develop your leaders properly and make sure they understand and they're trained and they have the skills, you make sure that they have the skills necessary to live up to those, then you're able to bring people into the company and see those examples right before you of leaders actually living those values because you've dedicated time, energy, and money as a company to ingrain those deeply in your leaders and the rest of the org.
Mm-hmm. And that's amazing work. And so, Lauryn, you know, before we have 1 minute left, what do you want the audience to walk away with? And I would love to hear, you know, the responses from all the panelists today.
My biggest thing is don't be afraid to burn it down. Like it can always grow back. You can always build it back. Like systems are meant to be destroyed and restarted. We've done them as humans since the beginning of time.
Anyone else?
I can go. I'm always at the end like to be super practical for people who are just trying to take next steps. Like one for me is I'm trying to also build my own allies. I need people that are different than me that I'm building real genuine relationships with. So that, use data, be willing just to have the uncomfortable conversation. You will learn more from these conversations of just leaning in, and then ask yourself, is it a Band-Aid or is it long-term? That's kind of my simple framework if I had to sum it up in 15 seconds.
I love that.
Hopefully we can do this again, by the way. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Go out, everyone, and make your version of this in the world. Remember to practice what you preach or change your speech. Period.
I love that.
Thank you, everyone, so much. I appreciate ThinkHuman, Bravely Amplify for their thoughtful and knowledgeable insight and just the engagement and energy that you brought today. Thank you to all the attendees and your wisdom that you also shared in the chat and the questions that you had. I hope and pray that this was beneficial to you and your organization. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.